everybody. This is Richard Sachs. This is Lost Arts Radio Live, and I'm your host. It's nice to see you again. Before we get started with the show, that's going to, as usual, go by really fast because super important, relevant, and exciting information. I want to, first of all, just put in a brief comment about what may be the most important news story, depending on how things go, that we've seen so far ever. And that is that there, about 9 o'clock this morning, this is 4:30 Arizona time that we're giving this live broadcast. And about 9 o'clock this morning, I found out that they had tested President Trump and his wife positive for COVID-19, supposedly. And at this point, they've taken them to Walter Reed Army Hospital. And as soon as I saw that story, and if you've got this background that I'm talking about, you'd understand. I said, this is an assassination attempt, because he wasn't really very sick. He supposedly had a slight cough, which any of us who cough by mistake in public these days could be accused of the same thing. And supposedly a very slight temperature, in quotes. I don't necessarily believe that, but that's what the official story is. And if that's true, maybe he needed to take a drink of water or take a rest for a few minutes or something like that. And even if it was a more serious respiratory disease, which there was no sign of at all, there are remedies for that that work right away. They're cheap, they're effective, they have no downside, and they work, and they've been demonstrated. And the doctors that have demonstrated and reported on them have been censored and attacked. And that gives you an idea of what's going on if you're somewhat knowledgeable about these things. What has happened since then is he's been taken to this hospital, Walter Reed, and given 2 extremely poisonous chemicals. Or you might know them better as medicine, in quotes. Most of the toxic drug medicine now is actually poisonous chemicals that are branded as medicine, even though the father of medicine, Hippocrates, said do no harm. He didn't just say do not too much harm, except for the side effects. He said do no harm at all. And modern medicine is violating that all over the place now. So anybody that's given these 2 dangerous drugs is subject to really being very sick, if not dying. And that changes the whole situation. We're not going to spend the show on this right now, but I felt like I had to mention it to you watching the situation. It's very serious, because if he becomes incapacitated or dies, the government will go into the hands of initially Pence, but probably much worse people. And so we need to watch that carefully, pray for President Trump, and learn what's going on. We'll have more about it soon. As soon as I have time, I'll make a full video about just that. We'll get into it. Now, what we wanted to talk about today for our live show is Jekyll Island. And you know that what's happening there is there's an expo connected with Red Pill University called Red Pill Expo, happening on the 10th of 11th. That's a week from now, starting a week from today, on Jekyll Island. And there's going to be a whole bunch of great people there. And it's all started by G. Edward Griffin. It's connected to Red Pill University. And they are meeting at the site of one of the most important events in world history and American history. And that was the basic strategy meeting for the Federal Reserve founding. And G. Edward Griffin wrote a great book about that called The Creature from Jekyll Island, meaning that the Federal Reserve originated from that meeting on Jekyll Island, which is off the coast of Georgia. And there's another person who's going to be presenting there who wrote a great book called 10 Days at Jekyll Island. I think I got the title right, and has made some other great documentaries. We're going to get into that. And her name is Patrea Patrick. And I was hoping that she might be nice enough to come and be on a live show right before the event, encouraging many of you to either go in person or sign up for the live stream, which you can see from home. And so Patrea said yes, and she's here, and we're going to have a really interesting discussion to get into what she's doing and what's happening at the expo and a lot of stuff like that. So welcome, Patrea, and thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it.
This is great. It's a great opportunity to discuss 10 days at Jekyll Island. Yeah. The secrets, the deep secrets that now are coming to light.
Well, I think a lot of people in this group have heard of the creature from Jekyll Island being kind of a primer on the how the Federal Reserve started and how it works, but we need all of them to learn about and read 10 Days at Jekyll Island. So before we get into that, just by means of more full introduction to you, before you were involved in all this stuff, how did you basically step up to this kind of a focus back from your earlier life to then?
Well, I am very much into story and the drama and filmmaking. And when you're researching for a good film, like look at Oliver Stone said, oh, I want to make this JFK. Well, he did this great research. And much like that, I wanted to make a film about the central meeting that happened at Jekyll Island. And as I dug into that, I found out incredible little tidbits and the information that they had been hiding for a long time. Not much had really been out about it, but if you dug and knew where to look, you could find some pretty good things that really put the story together from the different characters who really wanted to be known that they were part of making the system that we are now living in. What we are now living in is a century under that rule. So this book, 10 Days at Jekyll Island, really defines a century. It's the story that defines a century that we're living in.
Okay, now I want to bring in the whole audience, including parts of the public that have no idea what we're talking about yet, so that they can start learning about the same thing and not just the people already into studying Jekyll Island. So if you're talking to those people just for a minute, how do you bring them up to speed? What Jekyll, what? I mean, what does this have to do with daily life and what's it about?
Well, what happens to do with our daily life is that we are spending these pieces of paper called Federal Reserve notes. Mm-hmm. And we've been spending those, and those really do affect our life, whether we notice it or not. And most of us, it's something we don't notice because we think, oh, that's money. But it's actually just a Federal Reserve note owned by a private bank. And as long as those are printed without any backing, and they print as many as they want, well, somebody has to pay back that loan because those notes are just really a loan and they're being printed and printed and printed. We've all known about that, and lately we've heard about the Fed going out and printing another trillion and another trillion. Those monies, those notes need to be paid back, and so we're going to be stuck paying that back. So I think it's critical, even if you don't care about anything else, that you don't want to be stuck paying someone else's loan. So if you go out and if you could get a chance to see 10 Days at Jekyll Island, read The Creature from Jekyll Island, you get a gist of why that is really against American freedom. You want to be able to have money, but you don't want a system of this credit debt that the Federal Reserve back at Jekyll Island in 1910, 11, 12, when they were putting this through, it changed the whole way that the government allotted money.
So there's so much to get into here. I mean, this can be a long, long discussion. Maybe we can do some further installments, but for the moment, a lot of people I've noticed think that economics is way too difficult to understand, that you just have to do whatever the experts say. And this is something that would take you decades to even understand. And I found that it can be boiled down to accurate, simple elements. One of those, if there's, the origin of money coming out of barter, where it's really inconvenient to carry your cow down and try to buy a new car with it. You wanted something that represented the value of all kinds of items like that, so that maybe the car dealer doesn't need a cow, but can relate to the number of gold coins or silver coins, something that doesn't lose value and is scarce, so there's not an overwhelming number. And then when you change that into pieces of paper that represent the gold and silver and savings, sometimes if the paper represents an exact gold coin or silver coin, the paper has value. But then you start printing paper with no limits, and it's just all controlled by the printers. Right? And that's the situation that we seem to be in now.
Exactly. The first dollars that we had, and what even like President Lincoln would agree with, is a silverback certificate. So that if I give you this piece of paper, it says you may go to a bank and you will get the equivalent of silver or gold for it.
Right.
So if you look at your Federal Reserve note now, that's what we carry. You are not able to redeem that in for anything. All you can do, you can give it to the bank, but they are not going to give you any gold. And that was the whole purpose of this meeting at Jekyll Island. And it's very simple, actually. And that's what the book does. It simplifies it. It's just so simple. The reason it seems complicated and it seems complex is because the Fed and those people that are printing out that money want it to be complex, want it to be boring, so that by the time you start watching one of the Fed things on TV, you're going to like fall asleep. You're going to be so uninterested. You're going to be so confused, and you're just figure you don't want to deal with it. The other thing is you don't get to vote on this. There's no place, which there should be. Do we want a private bank charging interest on the money we are borrowing from them? If we had it the way Lincoln wanted it, the way Jackson wanted it, I believe even the way Kennedy was going towards, you'd have money backed with gold in Fort Knox, and we would actually have a note that said redeemable in a quantity of something valuable. Once there is nothing in Fort Knox or backing that note, and somebody just hands you a note that says Federal Reserve note, it's worth nothing because the amount of those pieces of paper that they are able to print. Right. That's simple for anybody to get. And I love it when the movie comes out, 10 Days at Jekyll Island. It's just an eye-opener. You get it right away. Like, that's what it is. It's not complicated. It's not complex. It's just devious.
Yeah, exactly. So some people might think, okay, well, the Federal Reserve is coming in. In fact, when they were starting, one of their big selling points was there would be no more volatility in the financial markets, and there'd never be a depression or, runaway inflation or anything like that, which was the opposite, of course, of what they planned to do. And I think when they were coming in, they were saying, we'll take this out of politics so that it'll be totally reliable and stable. And it gives the impression that they're this big, incredibly rich private entity that's just coming in to save everybody from instability, because they just must have trillions of dollars that they can put into circulation.
Exactly. And what happened, if you go back and do the research, which, listen, for anybody to go back and do that research, it's very tedious work. As a filmmaker, I do that, and I really enjoy it because I end up finding out really interesting things. And one of the things that you're going to read in 10 Days at Jekyll Island is that in around 1883, there was a big bank crash, and then another one, around in 1907. Now, J.P. Morgan had owned the newspapers at that point. And he had also owned a lot of the banks and banking interest. And he had, I hate to give it away, but he caused those crashes. And it's not known that he did that, but he did it by a very clever way and a very clever idea that hadn't really been thought of or busted at that point, which is you just print something in the newspaper, and then all of a sudden people believe it. And he owned the New York Times. He owned these newspapers, and he owned the banks. And so he could make it look like, oh my gosh, crash is coming. So it was printed in the newspaper. Get your money out, crash coming. So he caused these things to happen without it looking like he had anything to do with it, or that the banks had anything to do with it. He was just I'm just being an honest reporter. And it wasn't even known he owned that newspaper. He was there. You hear the game Monopoly is all about the monopolies that J.P. Morgan owned. And it just wasn't known what he owned. But certain people were saying, wait a minute, he's owning too much because of the power. And this is what they were talking about. It isn't owning too much real estate. It's owning the power of the politicians, of the newspapers, of what's getting out into the world, of causing fear, of causing a complete panic and a run on the banks, which he was able to do, and nobody saw that he did that. And that is what the danger is. It was something very planned so that we could come to the realization as people, we're thinking, oh, well, there's not a safe haven in these banks anymore. Boy, we better vote on something. And all of a sudden, voila, there just happened to be a bill handy called the Federal Reserve. Oh, okay. And so that got passed. Although we didn't get to vote on it, it looked like that's going to save us from everything. And if we look diligently back through time, ever since the Federal Reserve was put in, we have been trillions and trillions of dollars in debt. And what that means is very important to every one of us, because that money borrowed means that we, the people, have to pay that debt back. And it's something like $200,000 per every person in the United States right now that you didn't agree that you owe. And that is going to come out of your paycheck, out of your pension, out of your pocket, out of your purchasing power. So it's really important that without anything right now, without anything happening, that money is going to come out of your future and has been coming out of. It will come out through a hidden tax called inflation. So it's just critical that we as people understand this. It's not any scientific thing. It just was a brilliant little plan. But once we pull the curtain back, we see what it is, what it's doing, and what we can do to get rid of it.
So what's inflation, and how does that steal people's money without them knowing it?
Well, that is a boring conversation, but it's really just the price of, milk used to cost 35 cents a gallon. And now it's $4. Well, the gallon didn't get any bigger. As a matter of fact, now I think it's not, I don't even know if it's a gallon anymore. But the same thing with bread and gas, all these prices rise. So you think even the price of your home. So some people get to thinking, oh, my house is worth $300,000 and I only bought it for $100. Now I'm making money. But they don't realize if you go to buy the next house, that house is going to cost $400,000 or $500,000. So our money is not doing the same purchasing that it did when our parents bought a home for $60,000. Now we're paying for that same home like $500,000, $800,000. Really, it's this hidden tax. It's a very dangerous thing.
So you're saying the crash that was caused by J.P. Morgan and his friends was for people to get panicked that they needed a source of stability for the whole system, right?
That was it. That was the clever idea. And I don't think it was even J.P. Morgan's friends. I think it was just J.P. Morgan.
Just him.
Did that. And here is the thing. J.P. Morgan is very brilliant. And I have to give him that. And all the things I look at, I think, what a sharp guy. It doesn't mean I respect him, what he was doing. But boy, you have to respect your enemy and know, like, okay, this is what they're capable of. So if you look at Carnegie, was at the time the wealthiest man in the world, very studious, and he had to produce the steel industry, which cost money to keep mining the steel and then melting the steel and then a crew to do everything to get the steel to wherever. If you look at Ford was brilliant, but he still had to spend a lot of money producing the cars. So that cost a lot. He made a lot, but it cost a lot. And then you look at Rockefeller, same thing. He had to invest in oil wells, some oil wells. You had to get like 10 oil wells to get maybe 2 oil wells. And then you have to that actually make, have a gush. So again, he's spending a lot of money to make a lot of money. Right. So if you look at Morgan, all he had to do was sit down and think, how can I make money from nothing? So I look at him as the most brilliant because he could sit down, come up with this scheme that nobody knew, that he was able to put into place without anybody knowing he had anything to do with it. It was brilliant. And this thing to this day is printing out money for his cronies, his heirs, his wants, his desires, and whatnot, and nobody's been able to stop it.
So
You just have to really see how brilliant that was. Take a moment, everybody, and just realize that is such an incredible feat that it's lasted that long. And there's not really anything in place right now. It's nowhere you can vote to say, let's stop it. It's hard to get your politicians to discuss it, or where do you go to end this creature, as Edward Griffin talks about.
And John Kennedy tried to do that, right? I'm the president, I can do it.
It was believed that I'd love to look into it deeper, but it was believed that he wanted to get us back on the gold standard.
Supposedly there was an executive order that shut down the Federal Reserve, right? They just didn't obey it.
I would have to look into it farther, but I would think that it would be something a great man would want to do, and that needs to be done for our sovereignty as people. Like, it doesn't matter Democrat or Republican. Really, that has nothing to do with it. This is just us as people wanting to have our money service us and have us keep a dollar when we earn a dollar. It's fine to pay some taxes, but at this point, we're not only paying taxes and inflation, but we have to pay that debt back as well. And that is what we don't see. Nobody talks about it in those terms, that we are responsible for it. That means our children, our grandchildren. So we're putting a horrible debt onto our heirs without really realizing it. And we don't have a way to stop it. If we could at least say, I don't want to do that to my children, and I definitely don't want my grandchildren or my great-grandchildren looking back and saying, wow, we lost our fortune because of this, or we can't ever buy a house because of what our ancestors did. Whereas if you look at J.P. Morgan, their family looks back and goes, hey, wow, we got yachts, we have mansions, we have whatever we want because we did this certain thing. And it's not a legal thing that they did. Well, it's only legal in that they paired with the government, but it's not legal because the people did not get to vote on it. They did not get a fair chance to see what it was or get it explained to them. It was passed in secret over Thanksgiving, and not even the other members of Congress were around at that time. It was a very secret thing. It was the most clandestine secret meeting and the most important meeting ever held, because it's held us at a grip ever since it got into the legislation.
What was the name of that congressman? I almost remember that they hired to go in there and present the bill for the creation of a Federal Reserve Act to Congress.
They had one senator, but the one who was against it was more important than the one who. So Senator Nelson Aldrich was the one who went in and presented it.
That's the one I was thinking of, yeah.
But the one who went in to fight it, I want everyone to remember this name because he's a very famous person and one of the American heroes that hardly will ever get credit for trying to stand up against this whole bill. And that was Charles Lindbergh Sr. Matter of fact, it was the father of the aviator, Charles Lindbergh, the famous aviator. And his father knew the diabolic plan and had been working with a lot of other wealthy men who did not want this to happen. They did not want to see a Federal Reserve because they wanted to preserve their wealth. Men like John Jacob Astor, men like Guggenheim, men like Isidore Strauss, these very wealthy men knew that if the Federal Reserve came in, that every dollar that they already had would now start having this less amount and this interest on it. So they knew that wasn't a good thing.
Right.
And the reason it's so secret, and it has been kept so secret, is the fact that they don't really want us to know that we don't need that. But if you look back in history, one of the reasons we became America and wanted the sovereignty here is to get away from the central bank of England. And that was, a lot of people think, oh, we just wanted to be free. Free from what? Free from that banking institute and the taxation grabbing our money. So it doesn't have to be tax that grabs your money. It can be the printing of it, which causes your money to be worth nothing. If I can sit out here and print money, then it doesn't mean there's more money. It just means I'm printing paper, and it makes what you have in your savings all of a sudden dwindle down. That is the frightening thing, and that is what we need to understand. You know, we shouldn't be borrowing from an entity.
Well, especially when what we're borrowing costs them nothing, right?
No, they're just printing out. So they print money for the wars or for lending money. John Perkins had a wonderful book, The Economic Hitman. And it just shows, like, he went to countries and he'd say, we want you to borrow $10 billion. We're going to lend it to you. Mm-hmm. And they would say, we don't want your money. Oh, yes, you do want this money, because if you don't take this money after I leave, someone that you don't want to see is going to come and visit you, and that'll be the end. And John Perkins ended up really loving these other men because he could see they were upstanding or trying to hold their country together, and they didn't want this forced upon them. Right. And about 3 of them all of a sudden are found to be dead later on. But the point is, if they can print this money into existence, whether it's money we get or not. If you notice, just lately, we printed a few $1 trillion. It did not go to the American people. Where did that go? It went to foreign countries. And right. It's fine to help other people, but you know how many people right now in the United States do not have jobs? Yeah. Are suffering this whole close and shut down thing. It's horrific. And that's where it gets complicated, but it's not complicated to understand just that printing money is not a beneficial thing for us as American citizens.
So after that meeting, when they got what they wanted passed through Congress, that started the central bank that's called the Federal Reserve. Just the name doesn't really mean anything that it says. It's just impressive as a name.
Well, they did need to find a name. At first, they were going to call it like the central bank, and then one of them, Paul Warburg, wanted just to give it like some name like that, and they were saying, like, wait a second, if we give it a name that sounds like anything like a central bank, people will absolutely vote against it, or at least the people in Congress, they would get it. So right. Let's first off, they did something very clever. They got the bankers to say, oh, this is a terrible bill. You don't want to vote for that because it's going to hurt us. So then the people that were getting to do the vote, the Congress, would think, oh, if the bankers are against it, then maybe we better be for this. Right. So they gave it a very clever name. They thought, we need to give it a name that sounds like it's part of the government. Yeah. So why don't we call it federal? That's it. Let's call it federal. And then we need to think about, how does it sound like it has money? Mm-hmm. How about, one of them goes, how about let's make it reserves, Federal Reserve System. Why don't we call it the Federal Reserve System? Then it sounds like it's part of the government. It has reserves. Right. It'll go right on through. And so it did not pass the first time under the other name. They had it under the Aldrich bill the first time. It did not pass because people figured, oh, Aldrich with cronies with the bankers, let's get, we crush that. So that was why they said next time we won't put it with Aldrich's name. We give it a new name. We rethink it. It was just another clever thing to get it passed. And then what most people don't know, it was the only reason they even allowed it is that they said it will be a 25-year measure just because we're in trouble right now, and then it will be abolished. And so they gave it what they call a 25-year charter. And once that was in, Paul Warburg was very, very sharp, and he knew, look, we don't care if they give us a 25-year charter or a 15-year charter. Once we get it in, we're going to change it. We're going to elongate it. We're going to have it do what we want. So the first bill was a little mild, but you see over the years, it's gotten to now we're completely off the gold standard.
Right, right.
So it was a very, I love how Ed calls it. It was just like a creature, tentacles just closing in. And because generation from generation, it's 100 years, that's 4 or 5 generations, the people have forgotten. They've forgotten. And it's a plan for us to forget.
Exactly.
So they use that to their advantage because each generation has forgotten. So they just like, oh, now it's the normal thing to have this Federal Reserve note. But
they assume that it was always there.
Yes, it's logical. It's a good thing. So their strategy is very clever. They didn't just stumble upon this. They thought it out very well.
And before that bank was established, all the local banks, I guess, were independent or in independent groups, right? Not controlled by a central bank.
They did have a lot of that. And so that was how Morgan's faction was able to say, oh, isn't that too confusing? Because they used to have an intermediary bank that you could go and take, like a clearinghouse where you could take any note from any bank, and then for a little bit of fee, they would take it back to the bank where it belonged. But you're correct in that, like there'd be a Bank of Pennsylvania and banks in each state that were more local.
Right.
But they did have the backing. If you and I and all the town said we are going in there and getting our gold today, they would be able to satisfy you.
Okay.
Whereas once the central bank now took over, they were printing money on the idea that they didn't have to have that much backing. They only needed to have like a certain amount of backing in that bank for them to go and loan out money. That isn't good. And that's why when the 1907 panic happened, the 1930 panic on the bank, when people went to the bank to get their money, there wasn't the money. There were the paper things. Yeah, I mean, they could have printed a bunch more paper things, but there wasn't any gold. The paper isn't worth anything. It's just a receipt. All the dollar is, the $20, the $100 bill is just really a receipt that I can carry around easily in my pocket. And then when I go to the bank, I know that I can redeem my real gold. And if I give that $20 or $100 to you, you can take it to that bank and you can say, oh, I'd like the gold, and I'd like some gold and silver for this note. And they will do that. So it's just an easier thing than lugging around. Gold's heavy, so silver is heavy.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it just was a simpler system. So yeah, a lot of the banks in the local areas catered to the people, the farmers. Most of the people were a lot of farmers back then. And so it was a good system. And then by taking over it all, by saying it's too complicated for people to take a bill from Pennsylvania over to California, that wasn't really the problem, because people in Pennsylvania usually stayed in Pennsylvania. And if they went to California, they were going to stay in California. It wasn't like commerce now that we have. So it was just a fabricated thing, like saying, oh, it's so inconvenient. And they were really just trying to say that the clearinghouses were making too much money and it was too complicated. But it was fine. It was a fine system, and it kept people honest, because you could only have so much money in the bank. Right. And so, or you could only give out so much money and be realistic with what your pieces of gold were there. You couldn't cheat as well.
So you brought up a really important point, the principle of fractional reserve banking. And it sounds like you're saying before the central bank existed, that they actually kept the gold and silver in the bank so that they could pay off all of the customers if they came in and wanted the money. So am I correct that fractional reserve banking started when the central bank started? And if that's true, I guess the idea is that, I mean, this started to some extent a long time ago with the goldsmiths, being the early bankers, right? That they discovered that they didn't have to keep all the gold because almost nobody ever wanted it. But on a big scale in America, is it true that the real main fractional reserve banking started with the Federal Reserve? And now also you might explain that aside from the Federal Reserve, the local banks are all doing this now too. And so a local bank doesn't keep the reserves they need to pay off. Well, all they have is paper now anyway. So that's a huge scam happening on multiple levels, right?
Yes, and I do not think the Federal Reserve in any means was the first to do it. There was shaving off of gold even.
Right.
If you looked at some of the old coins, you'd notice like they would somewhat shave off a little bit here and there. And there were people that were a little bit shoddy. But again, that's up to you as a person who has worked hard for your money to say, hey, that coin is shaved, or I don't accept that coin. I mean, we have to use our judgment here. We can't, if you're a fool enough to take a piece of copper and think it's gold, then you're going to be shammed. And so there were certain people that got shammed. There were certain banks that were a little more shammy. There were people that got shammed. But the way it should work, if we're supposed to have some kind of a legitimate government, at least watching over us, and that's what the government should do. It just should keep that entity correct. It's not supposed to raise its tentacles everywhere, but just keeping it that, if we're going to have banking, that it should be done honestly, and that's completely gone out the window. So right. I just wanted to mention, because our time is short too, that the Red Pill Expo is going to be discussing a lot of things that are happening now and how they affect us. And of course, fractional reserve and the Federal Reserve is really, really a big topic happening right now. And I just wanted to go back to what you had early on asked me, one of the reasons I got into this. And I was very interested once I started finding out about J.P. Morgan. And I was mentioning he had all these monopolies. He had shipping lines. He wanted to buy up all the steel industry. He was buying up all of the newspapers, all the train lines, and on, and is involved in the Panama Canal. And he just was way overextended, actually. You know how people could look rich right now today? Oh, I'm rich, I have everything, but yet they bought everything, so they're really like cash poor.
Yeah.
And so I was looking into this, and I'm realizing, as Morgan's one of the wealthiest men in the world, so I noticed that he owned the White Star Line. Now, the White Star Line was the line that Titanic was from. As a matter of fact, J.P. Morgan went to the White Star Line and knew they were just about going bankrupt at one point. And so he went over there, and he had his own yacht. Morgan had the largest yachts built for him consecutively, up to like four or five yachts, and each one was just outrageous. And he used to take people on his yacht, and it was really a planned thing. So he'd take them on his yacht, these men, and then he wouldn't let them off the yacht until they agreed to whatever his scheme was. Like, you are going to sell me this thing or you're not getting off the yacht. And like, that just was unheard of. But they finally would give in because, he'd give them a good offer. But the point was they wanted to get home, and they knew they wouldn't be able to manipulate Morgan. He just had it over them. So he took his fabulous yachts and he went over to Ireland there in Belfast and purchased the White Star Line that was faltering at the time. So people don't realize that Morgan owned the White Star Line. And so he ended up getting into some jam, and this is the book I wrote, Titanic, A Perfect Crime. And I will be speaking a lot about this at the Red Pill Expo, because this really lays out what his interest was with Titanic. And perhaps if we look at, why this is a critical story, it's not like Titanic just happened to sink. There's a lot of other factors that went into play here for it sinking, and the ship, the sister ship, and using Captain Smith. When we look at Captain Smith's record, there were so many crashes that he had done with other ships, killing some of his crew even, and killing any chance of him becoming a captain for the very first ship off the line, which was Olympic, Titanic's sister ship. So for Morgan to give Captain Smith the captainship of Titanic is very suspicious. If you wouldn't lend me your Rolls Royce and then I would crash it 3 times. That's what he did with Olympic. He crashed the sister ship, the first one off the line, 3 times. Captain Smith. Okay. And then you're going to say, well, that's okay. Now I'm going to give you a brand new ship, Titanic, and you can just take that one out. And what did he do? He took Titanic out, and on the maiden voyage, he almost crashed her just getting out of the docks, and then took her out, and 3 days later, she sunk. So what is going on? I would say if I lent you my ship to captain, or if I was letting you captain the sister ship Olympic, and you've crashed her 3 times, I'm going to think real squarely, and I had other captains I could choose. Why would I let you captain Titanic? It's a fascinating read. It's a fascinating piece of history, and it leads us to see what's happening today, why things are like they are. So history can very easily repeat itself, or at least if it's not, it's close. You understand why things happen. You understand that those things can happen again. I think it's really critical to read books like this and 10 Days from Jekyll Island, so you see the mind think of what has surpassed in our history, right, and not that long ago, that affects us today. If you see that correlation, then you have some ground to stand on. It's not like you got to go out and fight, but you feel like, well, now I get it, and I don't need to. I need to do something to be able to move, like to say I don't want the Federal Reserve. And it's a very tough thing, because it's not like when we're going to go out and vote in November, there's like vote for a president and vote for clean air. There aren't these things like vote for the Federal Reserve. The things we would maybe want to vote for aren't on that ballot, but those are the things that we could change.
So it's the Federal Reserve is a private company, essentially, right?
Yes.
From what I understand, it's largely foreign owned, and it doesn't show its full books to anybody. So it's an unusual situation.
It's a very unusual situation, and if it is owned by a foreign entities, that would even be worse, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think that's the case with some of the
that would be a frightening statement, because here we are, trillions of dollars of debt to who? And I would ask anyone listening, name me any members of the Federal Reserve, not just the bankers of it, not the heads, the people behind it.
Right, the people behind it. And
I'll tell you, I don't want to know who they are either.
Yeah,
Stick my neck out that far. I'm just writing this, by the way, as an exciting book, and it's going to be made into a film, and it'll just be something exciting and give people food for thought. And I expect people to go out and do your own research, believe what you want to do. But as far as a darn good movie and an exciting book to read, that really causes you to think. I do think these are the 2 best books out there right now.
Where do people buy them?
Titanic: A Perfect Crime is available on Amazon.
Okay.
And it's really priced at like $20. It's hardly expensive. I'm not making much off it, because by the time whatever. And then 10 Days from Jekyll Island, which I don't have a copy of here with me, but 10 Days from Jekyll Island is a fascinating read. And so those are the topics that will be covering, and I know everybody can't go to Jekyll Island, but it would really be great if you just join and you can see it streaming right in your own house.
Right.
And it's going to be very, very informative, some very good speakers. And
so where did you say they can get the 10 Days at Jekyll Island book?
10 Days at Jekyll Island as well on Amazon. So if you just go to Amazon Books, you punch in that title and then just say on Amazon, it'll pretty much take you right to where the books are.
And you mentioned the live stream, which could be great for attending from your home to the meeting at Jekyll Island this time. What about if somebody is working or busy one of those 2 days? Can they somehow see it after the fact, or is it only right when it's happening?
That's something that you could find out with looking on the redpillexpo.org.
Okay.
I think, and I do think that it will be recorded. I think it'll be in their archives so that you can review it. I'm pretty darn sure that it will be. I know my segment will be. They told me that mine.
Okay.
That mine would be there.
So we just have to confirm that if you buy it, I think it's what, $35 or something like that for the live stream. Yeah. Whatever the price is.
That is so well worth it.
Oh yeah, that's cheap. And then the question will be whether that allows you, if you're not free all day, both days, if you can go back and see it later on. So we'll have to find out. I
do think that is true. Because okay. I'm just saying.
That would make sense, because otherwise.
I know if mine's going to be shown.
Yeah, the rest of them should
then there are so many, the speakers that I could mention, they're very well known.
Right.
You might not have ever heard of me before, but these other people that I mentioned their name, their household names. So it's well worth for a whole weekend of this. And again, I'm sure once you buy I think even if you stream and watch it that weekend, that you'll be able to come back and just review it, because sometimes you'll say, that was a lot of information. I want to watch it.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And do you have any idea when the movie for your book on the 10 Days in Jekyll Island is going to be available?
I am in pre-production now. And if there are any big wigs listening now, they are able to contact me. It'd be great, because we're always looking for the funding.
Yeah.
So startup funds are usually the hardest to get. But I have some very big names attached already. And so it'll be exciting if anybody does want to jump in and be what we call an investor.
How much does it cost to finish it at this point?
Well, we're looking at $4 million to finish. Okay. So that's really nothing. But the way this movie is right now, we're not a big Hollywood production, so we don't need that kind of money. We're paying people that want to be part of the film. So it's they call it like a project. I love that you're doing it, but we'll all get some pay, but we really just all want to see this movie made. And I think then the movie will really make a lot of money. I think if we get our budget, something that you're not supposed to ask filmmakers, and they always talk around the subject, but I think we can make this for around $4 million and make 40 or 50 million. So I think we'll make a killing on it. So
it sounds like a really important film. Yeah,
as an independent, but not only is it, I mean, who cares, like, really, under films, if it's an important film or not? But if it's just a film, you have to go see.
Yeah, exactly.
And then it changes your life. Then you really have something there. I mean, with Cameron's movie, we all just had to go see it. And we all knew Titanic was going to sink. Are we morbid? Did we just want to watch people die? No, we wanted to see how the individual story in that film played out, and how the characters dealt with that, how they handle that situation. And same thing with this book. We're seeing it. It just takes nothing from this book. Titanic, Perfect Crime takes nothing from Cameron's film. You're not going to see anything different here, except you can. In other words, you could pretend Jack and Rose are running around doing whatever they're doing, but we're more concentrating on what happens with Captain Smith. What was Captain Smith really doing? We just see him in that movie just doing a turn about and then he walks into the thing and gets flooded. Well, we go back to seeing his crashes. We're going back to seeing J.P. Morgan purchasing. This is really about what J.P. Morgan and his involvement. So it's the first time actually that anybody's done a book where we looked at what Morgan was doing. Why was Morgan involved? How did Morgan play this out? Why did Morgan do some of the things that he did? Where was Morgan at certain pertinent times? Why did Morgan cancel his reservation on Titanic? And why was he was saying that, oh, well, I'm ill, and he was seen perfectly well later that day with his mistress. Mm-hmm. So it's just a fascinating, epic story that as I say, it doesn't take anything away from the other Titanic movies because they don't discuss this. All they're focused on certain people get on Titanic and have some dinner, do a little dancing, and fight in their family or whatever they do, fall in love, and then the ship starts sinking, and how do they deal with it? But that's fascinating. But this is fascinating in that we're seeing the whole reason that Titanic might have had to meet her demise.
Yeah.
In a rather interesting, timely, So I think people that read this book, and when this film is going to be made as well, it'll be a real eye opener. Yeah,
adding a lot of dimension. What about other documentaries that you've made? Are there some of those available too?
Yes, they are on our Heartfelt Films website. I did a fascinating documentary on the electric grid, so I know a lot about that too. I've done a lot of tours and speaking engagements on that because it's a real problem right now. The tax, not tax, money tax, but how much our old electric grid is being taxed. It's never been like sort of, like you look at a car like a Model T Ford, and then you look at Tesla. Well, our electric grid is it's like the old Model T Ford, and it's just been kind of fabricated and built upon every few years, every 10 or 20 or 30 years, they'll do a little bit of reverberation on it to get us to the next level. But it's not like they completely said, hey, let's tear that down and do the right thing, and let's build like a new Tesla type grid, because they don't want to do that because they would lose the power of, they would physically lose power. We'd physically be without power while they were doing it, but they would also allow other people to step in and say, oh, we could do something better. And so that, again, is important to understand because it's regulations. It's the people that have the money that are keeping those corporations, those electrical corporations, those energy companies in power. And that will not change until those power companies are made to do the right thing. It's very ugly and it's very dangerous and a very precarious situation for how heavily our grid is dependent upon for our military. Our whole entire military runs off this civilian grid. If this grid goes down by an enemy taking it out or just by overload of it, there's a real possibility, the way it's set up, that you could have cascading effects. So one entity goes down, it can cascade to another power thing because connected. So they kind of like electrocute each other if they're on, and the surging powers. It's very frightening. And I was interviewing some people who were in tears after they told me some of the things, and then they couldn't even tell me some of the worst scenarios about if the grid went down and how easy it is to take the grid down, and why it isn't being done. There's some good things out there now that are possibly happening, but the film is called Black Start. And then I'm also working on another one called Grid Down that's in production now. So I've got a lot of things in production right now.
Is Black Start available somewhere?
Yeah, Black Start's available on Heartfelt Films. And I have another great film, American Empire. And I I would love it if everybody saw that film. Just that I think it's a great film for you or for anybody, you out there, to get and just to buy 10 copies and just give it to people who are on the fence or don't have any clue. It's not about Democrat or Republican, but it's just showing like what our freedoms are, what our country's been doing, and do we agree with that? I don't think we all agree that we don't particularly, want to harm other countries or go to war. I think we end up in wars, but I don't think most people want them. And if you had a place to vote, you might look at that differently. But you'll get an idea of what we've done, like where Agent Orange came into play, and where it even goes to explaining where the Federal Reserve came into play. And so it's kind of a little overview of what the American empire that is now ruling us, how they put us into the situation we're in now. So in a nutshell, after watching that, you get a non-political, just a kickback view of where we are and how we got here. So I think I've had kids watch that film, like a 16-year-old, and said it changed my life. Wow. It gets into what's going on with the food industry, the education, and just the whole gauntlet. So it's really a very entertaining film.
Did you say it's available?
Yes. Or not? It's called American Empire.
On your site?
On my site.
Okay. Heartfeltfilms.org, right?
No, I think it's .net.
Oh, yeah, you're right. I saw it this morning. It's .net. Okay, so I'm thinking, and people get to meet you if they come to Red Pill Expo. You're going to be leaving for that.
Well, soon. I get to meet them, actually.
You get to meet them too at the same time. Yeah, that's going to be great. So what do you want, since we're down to the last minute or so, what do you want people to hold in their mind about everything we've been talking about?
I'd love it if people would look to see honestly where the future is heading, think for themselves, using the information that we've talked about today, looking into things honestly for themselves, trying to look past any Republican or Democrat thing, right. Looking into the values of the American values. How do we get those back? What values have we lost? I think it's the most important thing is that people look for themselves. Too much is sitting around listening to the news and just, gabbing back at, oh yeah, I heard this on the news, and we're not spending enough time educating ourselves. Right. And that is something that our founding fathers were very explicit about, that you need to understand and defend yourself, defend your country, defend your freedom and your rights by knowing what they are. And freedom is we're not just free because we're not in jail. We're not free because right now you can't just pick up and say, well, I want to leave America. If you actually wanted to leave right now, you have to buy your sovereignty back from any monies that you make if you leave this country. And it's hard. They want to have a tentacle on you monetarily. And so there's just the things that if we understood, is that something we want? I mean, we came, whatever the people were that came here to get away from tyranny, to get away from this horrible taxation, to get away from these central banks. And now we are the worst we're the biggest now, and we're promoting it, and we don't see it because we think we still have this freedom. And we need to know, again, what freedom is. How do we hang on that? How do we get it back?
Yeah. In fact, American history and the founding of the country and the ideals that are still waiting to be lived up to, they're not even taught anymore in school. And one thing that would be learned if they were is that your rights are what's called unalienable. They can't be taken away because they don't come from the government or corporations or anything. So even in a so-called emergency, none of that changes. You have exactly the same rights. None of them can be affected at all. It's just that it's hope that we don't remember that. So I
Well,
think one of the founders said that this idea of the constitutional republic, which also is only worth it if the Constitution is good, because a constitutional republic with a bad constitution wouldn't be any better than anything else. And that only works with what they called an educated public.
even Solomon, back in Solomon's day, said, with all thy getting, get understanding.
Yeah, high priority. Okay, well, it sounds like an exciting expo, and love to come personally, but I'm going to be here working, so I'll try to do the live stream and look for your talk there. It's going to be fun. So thanks for being with us. I really appreciate it. Look forward to doing more.
It was lovely. Thank you as well.
Okay, we'll talk to you again soon.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, you guys, that was Patrea Patrick. I thought she's going to do a great presentation at Jekyll Island. I hope you're going to be able to go. We've been getting calls and emails from some people that are planning to go, and even if they have to stay there in a campground in a tent, which might be a fun experience anyway, people are seeing just a hint of the great speakers that'll be there, Patrea and Ed Griffin and Alex Newman, and just a long list. You can see the whole list of speakers at redpillexpo.org. And I think that's about it for the moment. Those of you who are interested in or already in Planetary Healing Club, which is taking this to the next level and being able to work on yourselves and see how to get the most out of any attempt to heal the country and the world back to how it was intended to be, we'll be meeting in about 27 minutes from now. And you can access that if you don't know about it at planetaryhealingclub.com. It's a non-censored, interactive, supportive environment dealing directly with the things that are happening now. Other than that, if you happen to want to, and you have the resources and you want to help us stay on the air and fund our projects, we have donate buttons at lostartsradio.com and lostartsresearchinstitute.org and subscribestar.com/lostartsradio. Remember that we have a Sunday show too. We have had since the beginning and years ago when we started, and that'll be at 6 o'clock Pacific, 9 o'clock Eastern tomorrow night. We have incredible people there as guests, and tomorrow is going to be exciting as well. We've got somebody that you'll want to meet, and you can learn about that at lostartsradio.com, and that's where you have links to all the live shows and the archives and the various platforms that we're on. And the main messages, like Patrea was just saying, educate yourself, please take care of yourself, get yourself in good shape. That way you can be of more effectiveness in whatever you're doing for your family and friends and the world. And putting off taking care of yourself doesn't work. You got to do it more so when things are hard, and then build that into what you can contribute to everybody around you. And if we do that soon enough, maybe the plan of the global rulers to end life on this planet doesn't have to happen. And I still think that we have a chance. So let's prove it. And thanks for the time. I really appreciate all of you. And we'll see you here next time. Talk to you soon.